History remembers the rebels, the ones who dared to question, to challenge, to tear down the walls of convention. But few figures have ignited as much controversy, as much passion, as much sheer revolution as the man who stood at the crossroads of psychology, philosophy, and chaos, Dr. Timothy Leary. Was he a visionary, a madman, a prophet of a new age, or simply a man who saw what others couldn't or wouldn't see? This is his story. To understand Timothy Leary, we must first go back to a time before the psychedelic revolution, before the FBI labeled him the most dangerous man in America. We must go back to where it all began. Born in 1920 in Springfield, Massachusetts, Timothy Francis Leary was raised in a strict Irish Catholic household. His father, an alcoholic, abandoned the family when Timothy was just 13. The pain of that loss would shape him, fueling a lifelong defiance against authority, against the idea of being controlled. But young Timothy was brilliant, a sharp mind, hungry for knowledge. He enrolled at West Point, only to be expelled for breaking the rules, a pattern that would repeat itself throughout his life. Yet, even then, he was searching for something beyond the rigid structures of the world he was born into. By the 1950s, Leary had become a respected psychologist teaching at Harvard. He published groundbreaking studies on personality and interpersonal behavior. By all accounts, he was on the path to a distinguished academic career, but destiny had other plans. And then, he took a trip to Mexico. In the summer of 1960, Leary ingested psilocybin mushrooms for the first time. What he experienced would shatter his understanding of reality and change the course of history. This was the moment the old Timothy Leary died, and the new one was born, because what came next was war. Timothy Leary had tasted the forbidden. He had seen beyond the veil of ordinary perception, and now he was going to bring that revelation to the world, starting inside the hallowed halls of Harvard University. But this was no ordinary research project. This was the beginning of a revolution, and revolutions are never peaceful. In 1960, Leary returned to Harvard with a mission. He had experienced something transcendent, something he believed could unlock the human mind in ways science had never dared to explore. And so, with the blessing of the university, he launched the Harvard Psilocybin Project. The goal? To study the effects of psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, on human consciousness. But this wasn't just cold clinical research. Leary believed these substances could expand the mind, heal trauma, even evolve humanity. The experiments were controversial from the start. Leary and his team, including fellow psychologist Richard Alpert, later known as Ram Dass, administered psilocybin to graduate students, artists, even prisoners. The results? Some reported spiritual awakenings, others sheer terror. But one thing was clear: this was not the sterile, detached science Harvard was used to. Rumors spread, whispers turned to outrage. The academic elite began to question, was this science or something far more dangerous? Then came the experiment that would either prove Leary's theories or destroy his credibility forever. In 1961, Leary and his team gave psilocybin to inmates at Concord Prison. The idea? To see if a single, profound psychedelic experience could reduce recidivism, could change these men at their core. The results were staggering. Of the 32 inmates who participated, only 25% returned to prison, compared to the usual 80%. For a brief moment, it seemed Leary had found the key to real rehabilitation, but the world wasn't ready. The prison authorities shut it down. The media twisted the findings, and Harvard was watching. By 1963, the pressure was too much. Leary and Alpert were dismissed from Harvard, not for any crime, but for the sin of pushing too far, too fast. The message was clear: question the system, and the system will crush you. But Leary didn't care. In fact, he embraced his exile. "You're fired from Harvard?" he joked. "That's like being kicked out of a cemetery." And with that, Timothy Leary stepped onto the national stage. No longer just a scientist, now a symbol. The psychedelic revolution had found found its leader, and the government, they were waiting. By 1966, America was at war with itself, in Vietnam, in the streets, and in the human mind. And at the center of this psychic battlefield stood one man, Dr. Timothy Leary, now no longer just a researcher, but a revolutionary. 3 simple words, one seismic shift in culture, and a declaration of war that would cost him everything. Expelled from Harvard, Leary didn't retreat. He radicalized. He founded a commune in Millbrook, New York, where artists, seekers, and runaway teens experimented with LSD under his guidance. To them, he wasn't a mad scientist. He was a shaman for the modern age. But to the US government, he was public enemy number 1. Why? Because Leary wasn't just taking psychedelics. He was weaponizing them. These substances, he declared, dissolved the brainwashing of church, state, and family. And that was unforgivable. In 1966, LSD became illegal, and the FBI had their excuse. 2 years later, Leary was arrested for possessing 2 joints, a charge so petty it reeked of setup. The judge gave him 20 years. Maximum penalty, message sent, this is what happens to heretics. But behind bars, the philosopher became something else entirely, a martyr. From his prison cell, Leary wrote the psychedelic prayers, smuggled out page by page. Even locked away, his ideas spread like a virus. Then, the impossible happened. With help from the radical weather underground, Leary vanished. For 2 years, he was a ghost, hiding in Algeria under Black Panther protection, then fleeing to Switzerland. The FBI's most wanted man gave interviews from exile, taunting Nixon as a zombie, the perfect American. But empires strike back. In 1973, he was captured in Afghanistan and thrown into solitary confinement, designed to break him. When Leary finally walked free in 1976, the world had changed. The 60s dream was dead, but so was the old Leary. He'd seen the future, and it wasn't psychedelics, it was cyberspace. The PC, he declared, is the LSD of the 1990s. Ever the prophet, just not the one anyone expected. All journeys end, even the most extraordinary ones. By 1996, Timothy Leary knew his was nearing its conclusion, but true to form, he planned to make death his greatest experiment of all. This is how a philosopher says goodbye. Diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer, Leary refused to fade quietly. Instead, he turned his dying into a performance art piece, streaming it live online, chatting with fans, even designing his own deathbed VR experience. Some called it narcissism, others genius. But Leary knew, in a society that hides from mortality, public dying was his last radical act. Then came the twist no one predicted. The man who mocked religion now sought enlightenment. The LSD pioneer, choosing meditation for his final trip. Was this surrender? Or had he, after all his experiments, found the ultimate truths? On May 31st, 1996, Timothy Leary's body stopped, but his ideas, those were just getting started. Today, the world is finally catching up. Psychedelics are medicine again. Consciousness expansion is a Silicon Valley buzzword. Even the FBI's old files admit Leary was right about the mind's potential. So was he a hero, a villain, or something more fascinating? A human mirror, reflecting whatever we fear or desire about freedom itself. One thing's certain, the system tried to bury Timothy Leary. Instead, he multiplied. History belongs to the curious. So tell me, what walls will you question? What realities will you dare to expand? The past may be unfolded, but the future, that's always yours to create. He turned on a generation, tuned into the universe, and dropped out of society's grip. Now, witness Timothy Leary's final act, where death becomes his greatest experiment.